Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Talk Junkies, where tonight's going to be a very interesting night, as it is each and every single week here at the Talk Junkies household. Got Jesse in the house. How you doing, brother?
Doing well.
For any of you who are wondering, we've kind of taken a 2-week hiatus. Just a lot of stuff going on right now. But tune into the last podcast we did. I had Caprice Lee, an author, on. We talked about instead of schooling, and it was a really good podcast. We went in depth with the public education system and what all of that entails. And she's a big advocate for homeschooling and how that can change your child's mindset, their life, and the future of what it is to be a part of this society that we're in. But this week's going to be very interesting. I've been in contact with this gentleman. It's been a couple months now. I've been looking forward to this podcast within those couple of months. And right now, I feel like, Jesse, I've been defeated sometimes when we talk about taxes, man. And the amount of taxes that are put upon us when you go out to the grocery store, whenever you look at personal property taxes, whenever you look at your income tax, whenever you look at all these different types of taxes. I've always been fascinated to talk to someone about taxes. And Here we are tonight. Yep.
Here we go.
Here we are tonight. We got Chris Cherico joining the show to talk just about all of those things. Chris, how you doing, man? Thanks for joining Talk Junkies.
Yeah, happy to be with you guys. I appreciate you reaching out.
For sure, man. So you're from the 919, so appreciate that, and I'm sure you got a lot of good plugs out there. But tell us a little bit about yourself, man, and your journey and how you ended up where you are.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. So 20 years I've run my own personal training business. It was just time for a career change, and almost all my clients were self-employed. So, when you work with someone 3-4 times a week, you end up learning about what their pain points are. And the self-employed person, as well as the W-2 earner, really struggled with their relationship with their tax professional. So the soft skills from personal training rolled over really well to resolving tax problems. And that's been my niche. About 80% of what I do is resolving problems. The other 20% is just year-end tax prep.
Okay, so before we get into what we talked about on the phone earlier, I kind of want to just get a generalization of how we got ourselves, or how we kind of got into the position. Why do you think that taxes aren't necessarily brought in? Why don't we learn it in public education to the extent of what it's thrown at us when you're an adult?
I think it's confusing for a lot of people, and that subject matter just gets pushed off to the side. It'd be a really good thing to introduce a lot earlier. Same thing with money management. I think those are two subjects that are definitely not taught and would do a lot better to learn than, say, geometry for the most part, or a lot of things that just you learn it just to pass an exam, where it's a lifelong thing. It's part of everything you do, like you said, from the grocery store to property taxes, income taxes. It's never ending. And people struggle with budgets, and that would be something, you're spot on, would be great to introduce much earlier in someone's life.
Okay. So and even in saying that, just introducing it at an earlier age, whenever you look at the scale of what is going on, and like I talked to you on the phone, we kind of left England because of taxation without representation. Do you feel like we're in that type of environment now? How necessary are taxes? Like I said, the amount of taxes that's thrown at us, how necessary is that in this type of society?
Well, I think it's necessary, but I think it's also very poorly spent. And I think a lot of subject matter that we don't talk about, like term limits and other things, where people just they go in as a public servant and then they come out rich, and that's not how it should be. But that's funded by taxpayer money. So those, as well as all different programs, and these programs are they're draining the taxpayer. And often I'll hear from a client, healthcare is free. And it's free up until you exceed whatever the income is that you shared that you would make, and then you're going to pay dearly for it through Obamacare, for example. And I recently was asked a question from a friend, and she gets RMDs, required minimum distributions, about $150,000 a year, and those don't go against what she will have to share that she makes in order to get free health care. So if her earned income is low enough, she'll get free health care and bring in into her household more than most families make. And then you and I are paying that tax bill. So it just doesn't make sense all the way around. But she's not doing anything wrong. She's just playing by the rules of the system. So to afford what she gets as a healthcare subsidy, I think they're doing the wrong calculations as to what she can or can't afford.
That's interesting.
That is.
But how do you even get to that point though? Within that own system, there are ways to go around it and ways to play by the game. Essentially, is what you're saying.
Yeah, and she has an inheritance. So that inheritance that let's say was previously taxed, or it's taxed accordingly. But the fact that she'll have 150, 200,000 coming into her household, and she still can get, in essence, free healthcare to her, it just doesn't make sense. To me, it doesn't. So, but again, that's playing by the rules. It's how it's set up. Someone smarter may be able to tell you that's exactly how it should be for these reasons, but to me, it just doesn't add up.
And that was through Obamacare, you said?
Yeah, so that's how she's getting the free healthcare. Is her income is low enough to get the free healthcare, but it's not what she brings in for the year. It's what she actually earns that's low enough.
Right. No, I can kind of see where that comes from. I mean, whether or not you get inheritance or not, and you have that money. I mean, I guess if you got a large amount of money, it makes sense that you'd be able to apply for something like that. But I don't know. That's kind of strange.
Do you think that the taxation systems that we have now are like purposefully complicated?
Oh, absolutely. 100%. The person self-preparing a tax return, it's almost inviting you to make a mistake. So, and if it's not in your favor, you're probably not going to hear from the IRS to say, hey, Jesse, you made a mistake and we owe you money back. I mean, that does periodically happen, but that's not how it's designed. It's more if you leave out something or you do your math incorrectly, then you're going to get a bill. And that bill isn't timely. It's normally 2 or 3 years down the road that you're getting a bill. So at that point, you cannot amend a return in order to offset that and possibly save money in other areas that you were unaware of. You can just dispute what it is or pay it.
Which is what you make a good point though, because throughout the year, I mean, I'm 33 now, and just recently, I was just scrolling through my emails and I gotten this email and it said, hey, Paul, like you are owed this money for some unclaimed taxes that you never received. And a lot of the times you brush through those emails like, oh, it's spam, blah, blah, blah. But I actually, I think being 33, I can kind of tell a real email from not a real email, and come to find out there's a website that you can go to and find out what money is owed to you through the tax, the tax system or whatever it is. And for it to be that far off, you're talking 5 to 10 years. This is when I lived at 404, even before at Casey Drive. You're talking a large amount of time, and I think this is a good way to segue into the IRS hiring 87,000 agents. Is that the reason why? Is they're trying to make things more timely mannered?
No, I really don't think it is. I mean, that 87,000 employees are due. There's going to be some retiring, so there's the attrition that they're going to make up for. But they've also shared that more than half of that budget is going to go towards enforcement. So, and that's what people are scared about, because from my perspective, as a practitioner that calls the IRS line in order to represent my clients, they're answering 2.6% in last year in 2021 of the calls that come in. I mean, in 2.6%, the IRS, what they stand for is providing American taxpayers top quality service. Nothing at 2.6% is top quality service. And what makes it more devastating is when you realize they had 375 million calls come in. So that means 365 million calls went unanswered. So if you get a notice in the mail and you can't get through, nobody's scared of an agency more than the IRS. Your heart's going to skip a beat if you get a piece of fan mail from them. So if you can't get through, regardless of who you are, that's something that's going to be weighing on you. So no, I really don't. I hope it's for people being able to reach out and actually get some answers. But with those numbers, if it's half of it, another 40,000 employees are not going to be able to field those calls. So,
I mean, in the end, the IRS is just a business, like trying to acquire money. Why spend all this time and effort going after smaller small businesses? I know some people who have small businesses that are just cursing the government as of late. Like they'll curse Biden or whatever for, and I don't even know like the details, but they curse Biden for, I can't even have my small businesses because of the taxes right now and all this. And they're putting so much effort going after those people when they're like Jeff Bezos as an individual, which I don't know how accurate this is, but this is just things that I hear, online or whatever, that he hasn't paid $1 in taxes in X amount of years, and there's so much money there. And so it becomes very frustrating for a common person to be like, why are you going out, for my head, when there's so much money there that it would, that you can just get your money there? Why are you so much worried about me, in a small community kind of thing?
Sure. I think it's because there's more of you than there are of Jeff's. And at that point, it's Jeff is going to have the representation in order to either fight it or make sure it's done in his favor. Whereas the three of us, aren't going to necessarily always have access to that representation if there is an error in our favor, or something that we overlooked in order to dispute it. It just becomes that opportunity cost of what are you going to just write a check for and put it behind you, just based on the fear factor alone, or how it's going to then slow down your life.
Doesn't that sound a little bit like preying on the weak a little bit?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying that's the reality.
That's just the reality of it. I got you.
Yeah. I picked up a client the other day, self-employed. He describes his business as drinking from the fire hose. So he has a very successful business. He didn't get into the business in order to have the back of the house stuff in place. And then he's getting a notice and an audit from 2016 because they want to see whether or not he was charging sales tax properly. So whether he is or he isn't, it's just one of those things where he's overwhelmed with trying to keep food on the table and growing something, and just didn't have the stuff in place to do it properly. That's how he's being told it. Now, once we dove into it, there's nothing that he's going to owe, but at what point is he just going to cut a check to be done with it as opposed to get proper representation? And not everybody's like me that, charges flat fees in order to do what I do. A lot of times it's a retainer. If it's hey, Paul, it's 10 grand for me to represent you. Maybe you don't have the 10 grand in order to have it done. It's not, so at that point, what are your options? So, but he didn't do anything wrong. And in his situation, I can talk a little bit about it. He was doing very large projects in a roofing situation. So he doesn't have to charge it in the state that he lives in for the roofing aspect. If he was going in doing smaller projects, fixing the ceiling from a wet spot and putting in boots and all the little stuff, then that was something that he may have a sales tax liability. But again, he doesn't know any better. Where were you in 2016 to even go backwards and think in that kind of situation? So it's complicated. It shouldn't be where you're reaching back 6 years to try to figure out something. Like, are they that far behind? I think it's strategic from my perspective.
Because they know that you're kind of fumbling at that point, and it's harder to defend yourself.
They're going to look and see the growth, and they're going to know exactly what makes it worthwhile. If he was bringing in grossing, let's say $1.2 million, and then he wasn't having his sales tax properly charged, or whether he was collecting, and they want to see his invoices, and it's an in-depth dive. It's not just looking at a tax return. So it's hoping he's keeping his proper records and then not oversharing and causing more problems for himself while he's going through the process. So I'm a buffer for them in order to make sure he's properly sharing what he should be sharing and not causing more issues as he goes through the process.
Yeah. Like, I couldn't tell you what I had for dinner last Wednesday. Heaven forbid I have to go back, 8 years, as far as what some paperwork taxes were,
Well, you keep those types of things for 7 years or whatever it is, whatever they require, or.
Yeah. And they can go deeper if they see something that was blatantly done wrong too. So, but no, it just makes it it's very overwhelming. And now he's got to put, in essence, work on hold in order for him to be able to interact properly with me or the revenue officer.
That's unfortunate. So when people are in these types of situations, I'm curious, Chris, on just how much the Constitution plays into these types of things. And maybe it's kind of a weird question, but I feel like
the Constitution has anything to do with
it's
taxes. Per se.
I feel like it should. And again, maybe I'm wrong, but the Constitution lays out a foundation for how America should how it should run with all the things going on right now? Is there any type of constitutionality that goes into your type of work with a gentleman that you just described when it comes to sales tax or anything like that?
No, I don't necessarily think so. I think it's just, I think really what's drawing him to their attention is his gross receipts. And then it's just, it's maybe just, they look at social media. So from that standpoint, I know we got off the Constitution side of it, but they're looking to see how you're living your life in order to know, if you're saying you when it comes to the resolution side, if you're saying you can't pay or you're going through a tough time, but then you're living this elaborate lifestyle, that's something that they're looking at. But sorry, to get more onto what you were asking, no, I don't think the Constitution kind of weighs into it from my perspective.
Okay, and no specific reason why. I mean, again, like I talked about earlier, that's the reason we left England was taxation without representation. So whenever you build a constitution and a foundation for 330 million people, which they never knew that that's the extent of the population.
Everybody technically has representation for what they're being taxed in. Unless you're in a position of somebody with civil death. So like, let's say you have a felony. And okay, this is actually a good question for you and how you feel about this. So somebody who has a felony and can no longer vote, but they still have to pay income tax just like a normal person. Do you think that should be adjusted because I no longer have representation because I can't vote because of a civil death, but yet I'm still paying the same amount of taxes? Should I be taxed less because of that?
No, I would think you should be taxed equally. I don't think that you should be taxed less. Almost to me, that would seem like a benefit for that standpoint. I mean,
right?
Granted,
because then people would just get
a
minor felony and then not have to pay taxes on their $1 billion
you get
income.
Preferential tax treatment because you're not going to. Some people are at this point are thinking, is their vote even adding up? So
it is an interesting question, I think. But
I depending on what that felony will limit me doing, I may take your offer on that.
Yeah, no, exactly right. But I think that one's an interesting question. I've thought about that one before whenever it comes to a civil death. But, man, I had another question. Now I can't even think of it.
Well, I mean, whenever you become a lawyer, like it's a process, right? And you have to uphold the Constitution. So I guess like my biggest question throughout all of this process is like, again, just the amount of taxes that are going on, and that, I mean, again, and this is a big thing on TikTok, when people are like, they paint this picture, right? And they're like, you get taxed on your income, and then you go to the store, and then you get taxed on all the food and all the goods that you buy. You buy a car, you get taxed on that, and that's sales tax. And then after that, you pay personal property tax on that car. It's just, I guess what I'm saying is, how did we get away from it? Because to me, it almost seems like we went right back into just the same situation we were in the first place.
Yeah. No, I've never thought about it that way specifically, but you're right. It's every time you turn around, you're taxed when it comes to, every aspect of your life, whether it's the income tax, the sales tax, payroll tax, property tax, it's never ending. So no, I agree with you. And I think when you add it up as to how much of an impact it touches in your life, it's devastating. And then you're not generally getting what you want, whether it's a road that doesn't have potholes in it, or it's the education you want for your kids.
I was about to say schooling's
properly
the big
set
one.
up. Are they safe? Are you getting what you need when it comes to that? Are you getting the representation in Congress and the Senate and the president that you want? Are they caring about you and what you care about, or is it just all going to the wayside?
Well, and you see a large proportion, I guess this would kind of be my next question, is you see a lot of that money funneling into the military budget of the United States. What is it? It's like over $800 billion last I checked. How much, I mean, when it comes to, I don't know if you delve into that type of thing, like when it comes to national taxes and stuff like that, how does that all kind of work where most of our money is going to a military budget?
Yeah, and I don't touch that side of it, but it would be the federal taxes that you're paying on the income side. That's where that's getting, whatever portion of it is funded from that perspective.
Okay.
And then the states obviously taking their portion for however it's spent. And then I guess you would just look at the state budgets in order to decide, is it well spent or how it's allocated?
Gotcha.
Because of how much complexity there is within the IRS and all this the taxation that happens within all that, there has to be an error somewhere where there is money lost. Is that ever noted by the IRS of how much money actually is either floating that is owed to people or mistaxed people that didn't do it? That because there's got to be some floating money somewhere within the like in my mind, I'm like, there's no way that there's just not a bunch of money floating somewhere in a void. Like, what happens with that money? You know?
Well, I think the only number that they really share are unclaimed refunds. So, and sometimes that's an estimate from their perspective, but that's for the whomever is not filing a tax return that should be filing a tax return in order to get that money back. And you'd be shocked how many people don't file a tax return. And then after 3 years from the due date, that's no longer accessible to them. And I see it all the time. And it's something that for the person that's compliant and files their return, you can't imagine not filing a return. But if I'm in a group of 10 people, whether it's a BNI type function or playing pickleball, and I know there's 10 people around me, 3 have a problem easily. So when that problem is either they're not filing a return, they owe money, or they're unhappy with whomever they're working with, and that's in my opinion a problem as well. So I'm sure you can Google how much money goes unclaimed from that perspective. If it's a married couple, often it's one not filing, and then the other one is kind of stuck to not being able to file. I helped a gentleman and his dad had dementia, and in that scenario, we were talking about, each year it's about a $15,000 refund, and we were able to recapture it for going backwards 2 or 3 years, and then the current year, and then forward 1 or 2 before he passed away. And in that scenario, you're talking 15 grand times the 3 years that we went back plus the current. And it was just because he didn't know his dad was kind of not doing what he said he was doing. And the tax professional wasn't then reaching out to, Paul's kid in order to say, hey, your dad hasn't been sending his stuff. If I don't have a client that responds to me, after a while, I just think they've gone elsewhere.
Why would they do that?
If you owe 15 grand.
It doesn't sound like, in my opinion, the IRS isn't some out to help individuals. And
I agree with you, but they should be. At that point, there should be some level of,
because your tax money is paying for them too, which is almost kind of ironic, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But if you don't file that tax return and then it just goes into the system and it's still being used, let's say I resolve a problem for a client and they haven't filed a tax return in 5-7 years, let's say, and we start preparing the returns to get them compliant, but those older years, they don't even get applied to the current year balances. So if that person had 15 grand in refunds, let's say in 2017 and 18, and those are too old to get, but then it was a balance in 19, 20, and 21, it doesn't go to offsetting that. And to me, that's not right.
No, so at that point, they're not even out there to help you in the first place. If they can charge you from 7 years ago, but you can only get your money back from 3 years ago, that is ass backwards, in my opinion. Yeah. That's crazy. That's just a system set up for failure at that point.
Sounds like
I guess more or less it's to entice you if you get money back to do your taxes, but still, that's absolutely insane.
Yeah. And then the whole COVID relief, in my opinion, people were so excited to get that check for $600 and then $1,200. And then in the current year for 2021, $1,400. But what I think it's really done, it's brought people to the radar. So now you filed a return. So now they're going to think, Jesse hasn't filed a return in 15 and 14, but he did file in the most recent 2 years in order to get those. So now I think that's going to bring more attention to you in order to be like, well, why did or didn't you file a return in 2019 or 18?
Damn. So they got all those people. They got all those people who weren't filing taxes with COVID.
Which is such a minuscule amount of money anyway, whenever you think about it in the long run. Those amounts of money.
But in order to get the COVID relief, you had to be up to date on your taxes, did you not?
Well, there was a way to circumvent filing a tax return to get the money, but most people filed a return. So that's where I see them now being front and center. Another reason why I think the system's broken, so I did personal training for 20 years. No one ever gave me a 1099. So it's just not deductible to them. But I still filed tax returns because I wanted to be an adult. I wanted to buy a house. I wanted to be able to do everything an adult does. And you can't if you don't file a return for the major events like buying a house. But again, they can use bank statements in order to circumvent that, but it's a much higher tax rate. So why, again, that's my opinion of the system being broken, because pretend that you're self-employed in that kind of a situation. You're making good money. No one files a 1099 on you. So you have to be responsible enough to put the money aside to pay the tax you're going to owe. Now, it's supposed to be put aside quarterly, but let's say you don't even do the quarterly and you're going to pay a tax bill at the end of the year. So it's like you're volunteering to pay tax at that point, because it's not a W-2 from working at Starbucks, and then you either had enough money withheld or was a little bit shy. This is literally coming to the table to say, I made this, these were my expenses, and this is what I owe. So the system shouldn't be broken in that way. So, but if nobody's filing a 1099, you're completely off the radar. I had a situation with a client where he owned like 20 rental properties. And in that scenario, he never filed a tax return. So, but you got to think, you're paying rent. In that scenario, there's nobody filing a 1099 because rent's not deductible. So he's going to the bank with how much is rent for 20 years. So if you're going back to like 1990 and you're going to say he's going to the bank with what, $1,000 a month, that's not setting off any bells and whistles at the bank. If he's going, every other day to the bank with a check for $1,000, it's not a big deal from that perspective. So again, the system's broken in that capacity. But he's building equity in properties.
But this might be a really stupid question, but I want to say this before I get too far off here. Between a traditional bank and then you have oh man, I'm blanking out on it. The unions.
Credit union.
Credit unions.
Yeah.
Is there any benefit to a taxpayer having their money going through a credit union or a bank whenever it comes to taxes, or just the IRS doesn't give a shit, basically?
There's no difference to them.
Okay.
So, I mean, if they're going to have a lien or a levy on your property or garnish a bank
there's
account.
No like safety net between that. The IRS is God, basically.
There's no difference when it comes to that side of things.
Okay. I just wanted to get that out of the way before I forgot.
Yeah, I don't know. That's kind of weird to me, though. Like, whenever, like, if you talk about a guy who has 20 rentals and he never did income, or he never did his taxes or what have you, there are a couple questions that come to mind to me. Is one, are the properties paid off? And then how much profit is he making? I don't know. Like, how do you even, I guess that's a good question. You would still, if you have rental properties, still have to file taxes, though.
And yeah, he should have, but he never did.
But if you're paying, but let's say you don't own the house, but people are renting it out and you're only making a couple $100 extra bucks off that rental, they tax that couple extra $100. You know what I'm saying? I don't know how that works.
So he should have been filing at the end of the year, and let's say rent was $1,000 a month, so $12,000, and then let's say he had property tax of $3,000, that would be deductible, and then let's say he had expenses of $4,000, so he should be paying tax on $5,000, $6,000?
No matter what the profit he made off of, just the $5,000.
Yeah.
Okay,
correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so the total that came in minus his expenses. In theory, if we're just doing a ballpark, that's where we kind of start, assuming that you're not putting depreciation of the property in there. Just for a basic example, total income minus expenses, and then he'd owe tax on that.
Right. So we're kind of jumping around here, man. And Chris, this has been awesome, man. We've never had someone that can talk about these types of things. So again, I appreciate it. But I kind of want to bring it back to just, I mean, how can you delve into Social Security tax at all?
Not really. That's not my strength.
Okay.
And I don't do payroll tax. So that I think would kind of go hand in hand. I can introduce you to somebody that would be another huge topic for you.
Okay. What about how does the Fed's the rate hike affect Americans tax wise? Is that something you can go into?
Not so much. So the rate hike, you're talking about mortgage or?
Well, I'm just saying, like they've been raising it, like I feel like quarterly, just like a basis point, close to a basis point each quarter. So I got this one. I'm sorry.
It's all right.
Those are two questions that, you know what I'm saying? So I think last year Biden came out with a tax plan, or it was within the COVID stimulus package or whatever it was, where they built in that they wanted to tax anyone who was making over $600 via PayPal or Venmo or Cash App. Have you seen any of that in your practice at all?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, because it used to be if somebody had like a side hustle or something that was smaller, that was off the radar. So this is definitely another way to bring those earners to light from that standpoint. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I mean, because again, just because you're using the convenience of one of those apps shouldn't be where you're off the radar from that standpoint. So, but yeah, that's going to, again, make a lot more people have to file a tax return in that situation. So, I don't think that's bad. I mean, I'm all for people being compliant, and I'm all for you paying the least amount of tax you're entitled to. But what I see mostly are the problem side of things. So just so you know, more my niche is that side of it.
Right.
But yeah.
But like for me, like I was talking to someone who comes into my work, and he was like, yeah, he's like, I Venmo my wife all the child support money to pay for like insurance, food, all that shit. He's like, they don't go through a party through the local government. He actually Venmos her money. And I'm like, dude, you might need to be careful because they might be taxing her, or if she's receiving this amount of money. And I was like, I don't really know how that works.
You're supposed to have the business set up as more a business account through the Venmo, as opposed to if it was a personal account. So if I had a Guardian Tax Solution Venmo account, then that would be taxed differently than Chris Cherico Venmo account. And then that way, how it's noted when you pay the person would indicate whether or not he was doing something that was more of a business transaction or more of just, hey, I owe Jesse money for lunch type of thing. So how you note it on there is definitely important.
So whether or not, it basically comes down to how it's noted at that point.
Well, number one, it should be a business. If you're paying someone that's providing a service for you, you should be paying their business, not them personally per se.
Right.
So if they have it set up where if I did your taxes and you were Venmoing Chris Jericho, that wouldn't necessarily be the right route. That's more on me than it is you. But people try to circumvent the system all the time.
Right.
Like whether it's someone at a hair salon renting a booth, and then they're just saying, hey, Venmo me the money if you don't have cash, as opposed to using the credit card, because they're sidestepping the fee of a credit card. And the convenience factor is doing the Venmo as opposed to having cash on hand.
So there has to be a way in the technological advancement of what the society is for there to be taxes had in that type of environment.
Yeah, and I think this may be another thing 2-3 years down the line, that person gets a notice saying, in 2021, we saw you were getting X amount of dollars, and then that person's wife is going to have to say, no, it was child support money or alimony or whatever it was in order to, but I don't think it's going to pop up anytime soon.
That's crazy, man.
That's crazy. Yeah.
That's insane. I mean,
Yeah.
but it was coming. There's no way around it. The IRS is going to find a way to tax what it is that they believe that they should tax.
Yeah. Well, you were telling me, I believe, that you self-prepared your return, correct?
I tried, yeah. I'm a little bit late. I haven't filed yet. I know I'm going to pay the penalty. I need to do it. But I was not. I tried to do this a few years back, and it's the same situation. I don't feel like I did it the right way. Granted, TurboTax has a great website. They put you in. They give you great steps to do what it is you need to do. I still don't feel like I did it the right way.
Yeah, and I'm happy to review it for you if you'd like. My question to you was, I know we talked about the stimulus check money, also called the recovery rebate credit. So they've named it 2 or 3 things, I think, again, to just keep it confusing. But did it ask you cryptocurrency question? Did you buy, sell, dispose of?
For sure. And I definitely, it literally was just on my mind. That was another topic I wanted to bring up. And I think crypto's fascinating with how it's taken shape and how it's ran up this massive hill, with Bitcoin hitting 75,000 only last year at some point, and then you see it come down back all the way down to 16,000. I think crypto's fascinating. And yes, TurboTax did ask me that question about my crypto investments and stuff like that. And I think you even take it broader than that, Chris. You look at these apps like Robinhood and Ameritrade and Coinbase. A lot of that plays into the taxes as well. And especially with crypto, I think that's a great point that you bring up. How does that kind of work?
So there, people don't realize when they sign their tax return, it's under penalty of perjury. So that's huge when it comes to, if you're saying, no, I didn't play around with any crypto, and then they find out, let's say they subpoena Coinbase or something to get their user list, and then they find your name on there, then you could potentially cause yourself a big problem. And I'll see it with, I had a client one year, she reached out and she wanted to amend her tax return because she was unhappy with the outcome of the return that the tax professional prepared due to her taxable implications of her gain on her crypto. And then she's like, I didn't have any of this. So I was like, highly unlikely that the tax professional prepared your return and just made up the crypto numbers. So I just put her name into LinkedIn, and her background banner was cryptocurrency. And I'm just kind of like, number one, red flag that I'm going to amend a return that another tax professional prepared without it being very solid, that I'm seeing, what they may have done wrong. But at that point, I just let her know that, and then she eventually did amend it. She found someone to amend it, because at that point I had a power of attorney on her. And before I withdrew the power of attorney, I received some mail that she actually amended her return. So, I mean, it's like, she's definitely playing with fire when it comes to that. It may have taken her a while to find somebody that either doesn't do enough research to amend the return, or was new to the industry and just, amended it for her. She may have done it herself, but you got to remember, you're signing under penalty of perjury. So that crypto question is, not to, you can do anything you want with the crypto. They're not saying you can't. They're just asking that, just like they should have asked you, or TurboTax should have asked, did you have any foreign bank accounts in 2021?
Right. For sure. But within that, when it comes to stocks and cryptocurrency, because I think they're both becoming very similar. I think crypto's definitely fallen in line with what it is to be a stock. If you don't take any losses, or let's say I bought 20,000 shares in Dogecoin or Bitcoin or whatever it is, and I don't touch it. I don't touch any net profit and I don't take any losses, nothing like that. Are you required to report anything in that moment?
No, then you're just checking the box.
It's just like,
that you
just
did
like stocks, right?
Okay.
Buy, sell, receive, but you don't have to. There's the gains that you had in that. You haven't sold anything yet. So it's treated just like a stock. You have it correct in its taxable implications. It's once you sell it, that's when you're going to have to report it on a Schedule D in order to then treat it short-term, long-term, and that's just the difference of how it would be taxed.
Okay.
How do you feel about the TurboTax TurboTax, Credit Karma that does free online filing? How do you feel about those at all?
It's a tremendous moneymaker for me because I fix those returns all the time.
That's great. I am so frustrated. I literally have a notation because I've went through TurboTax a couple times, and I literally have a notation on my phone where I have all my information on it that specifically has an expletive: don't use TurboTax again.
Yeah.
And I was because they rope you in. It's literally like I get scammed. They say it's going to be free. Everything's free. I sit in front of the computer. I have stocks. I have dividends that come in, which makes things just more and more complicated. All this, I finally go through all this mess, and then they go, oh yeah, this cost $120, by the way.
Sure.
And I'm like, are you, whatever was free? Like, you're a scam artist. And I was so frustrated. And
they're talking simple tax return. They're saying one W-2, then they'll do it for free, I'm pretty sure.
But
yeah, I've never used the platform, but I mean, what I fix all the time are cost basis issues for clients. So that's them not knowing what they bought the stock at. And then they realize they have a financial advisor, and then they say to them, hey, Jesse, you couldn't have got Apple stock at zero. So when you sold it at, $15,000, you paid something for it when you bought it. So that's when I come in, because the financial planner refers me. I fix the problem, and then it converts to a year-round client for me, just moving forward. And that's how I built my book of business, is just networking with the people that can't make money, or they need that trusted advisor in the mix. So mortgage professionals, if it's Paul's trying to buy a house, but he hasn't filed a tax return in 5 years, well, how's he going to buy a house? So at that point, I get into the mix. I prepare your returns. You're compliant. You're no longer going to, stray from being compliant anymore. And I just keep that person moving forward if I'm a great fit for them. So,
Sure.
but those platforms, I think if it's a very basic return, because I'll see it all the time. I had a client and, he is an artist, didn't make a tremendous amount of money, made about $35,000 a year. I was doing his parents' return, but when I reviewed his, I saw that instead of getting I think he paid like $1,200 or $1,500 a year. When I looked at the return and did a quick draft on mine, I think he would have got like $700 back. So in that scenario, it's like a $2,000 swing. And for somebody that's making under 40 grand and has been doing his own taxes for 20 years, that's a lot of money. And what was happening is, however he was entering onto TurboTax's platform or whatever the free one he was using, he was entering that he had a home office and had business miles, but he must have been clicking something that was disallowing it. So the problem is when he looks at the actual tax return, he can't read it to be able to say, did he get credit for those deductions that he was entitled to? And therein lies the problem, when you can't see whether or not you actually got the deduction that you were supposed to. And that was the main difference when I did the return. And then he just didn't see that those things weren't being deducted. And that was the difference. And then it's awful that, $2,000 times 20 years, that's a whole year of his earnings that he missed out on.
Yeah.
So I think
so it's just crazy.
You do it for a living, and that's the difference. Like it's a specific job that you provide to people. Whereas when, Jesse and I try and do it, we've never done it before, and I try and do it and we try and do those things, but it doesn't mean we're doing it the right and successful way. And we're putting all of our money on the bank that's saying TurboTax has it done the right way.
Which in earlier years, in all fairness, I don't remember what years this was, but it was probably like close to 10 years ago. I actually went through Liberty Tax, which was, I don't know if they're like nationwide, but they're here in the Midwest.
They're here.
Okay.
Yeah, they charge an arm and a leg,
but
bro.
they used to, it used to not be that amount of money. Like it was like $100, and then if you got a referral, or like $150, $100, whatever, and then you actually sat down with somebody and you felt really confident about your tax return, and it was done really quick because they knew that they were doing. It wasn't a pain in the ass like doing it online.
It's because Liberty Tax was dealing with you, a specific individual with only a W-2.
But then also, I tried to go back through them in recent years, and it was like $500 just for them to sit down. And I was like, well, I can't do that. Like that's I could do $100, which now I'm about to have to go through a tax professional because I keep adding on other things, and taxes just keep getting more and more confusing. It's like the more avenues of income you have, or the more things you get into, just it's like this exponential growth of confusion. So this year, now I have a kid involved in all this, where I'm just like, I'm going to go through a tax professional. I'm not just going to try to do it online, which typically I get way too overconfident. But like I said, TurboTax was, way too much. But so that's my initial question. So like going through Liberty Tax compared to like close to 10 years ago, whenever I did it, was so cheap. Now they're just like charging an arm and a leg. And it's, is that just inflation?
No, I think it's just become, a lot of my colleagues aren't taking new clients. And I think it's the amount of touches that they have with the client. So this year, let's say Paul was my client. In that scenario, Paul sends his stuff or uploads it to the portal. And then I'm saying, did you get a stimulus check? And then he may be giving me, why is it taxed? Is it taxed? And then I'm like, no, it's not taxed, but it's, it's recorded. And then your outcome of the return is impacted by it. Did you get a stimulus check? Did you have foreign bank accounts? Did you have cryptocurrency? Did you, in some states, they want to know about the healthcare. The federal's not caring about that, but the states are, some states are when it comes to that. And then those kind of things, how many times am I now reaching out to Paul to get what used to be in the past, just his W-2 and maybe some dividends or, some stock trades, but now the cryptocurrency and all those other moving parts, as well as reaching out to you numerous times for these documents, and some of them wanting, for the due diligence side, wanting those actual documents that you've received in order to support the data entry, has just not been worth it anymore. And it's not a volume play. I have a colleague, and he used to charge the 150-ish range, and he's totally abandoned that process. And he's probably, for what you're saying, Jesse, he's an arm, leg, and an eye at this point, just because, for him, what used to be a good use of his time has now just become too overwhelming.
But hold on, Chris. I agree. I almost agree with you, but at the same time, like when I went through this process, and again, when I was using TurboTax, I made sure through myself before doing this that my wife and we were having conversations like, hey, the deadline's coming up. We need to make sure we have all of our ducks in a row. And I was like, hey, do we have what we've paid on our taxes and interest through our house? Do we have what we've paid in medical bills? Do we have? So I made sure I literally, whenever I did all of this stuff on TurboTax, we had her Ameritrade account. We had everything in line besides one document. And the only document I didn't have was what we paid in personal property tax on our house. So I agree with what you're saying to an extent with being frustrated with these people who don't have all the documents when they give them to the tax expert. I was ready all the way up until one document. It's the only document I didn't have. So, and at that moment, it literally took me an hour and a half of my time to put all that information into one website.
Sure.
So that's kind of where I disagree with that.
Yeah, and I mean,
but not everyone's like that. Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. Not everyone's like that. I mean, one CPA firm probably sent me 15 clients this year. So at that point, she doesn't have the infrastructure to handle any more clients. I don't know if that's going to be the same thing this coming year, but that was fantastic for me. I think probably 12 of them converted to clients. The other 3 I wasn't a good fit for. So if she still is at her capacity, that's, whether she's had enough, or a lot of them have just dialed it in, kind of like a concierge doctor, and just said, I need X amount of clients or patients at this price point. And then they're not dealing with filing insurance, and they're not doing those moving parts. For me, fixing the problems is a year-round play. That's not seasonal. So that's where I'm used to those touches with the clients. So that hasn't been a struggle for me to be able to reach out X amount of times. But I reach out to Jesse and say, hey, I need these 5 things. He may answer 2 of the questions. And I'm kind of like, this is just reading comprehension that I'm asking you to do, not taxes. I'm just asking questions. So that's the part I see where it can get frustrating. And then the same thing, another colleague is kind of like every year he raises his prices, and he just finds that pain point of who he wants to work with. So I think the Liberty tax and that kind of a situation, maybe the business model's just not working based on the volume side of it. Maybe they got slapped for not doing some due diligence. I think the main struggle you would see with those organizations is the turnover, because whoever you worked with last year or the year before, maybe is no longer with that firm, or maybe they've gone out on their own. So I think that rapport that you would have with them may be the biggest struggle.
Okay.
So we're
it's because I want my thing to be relationship driven. I want to know you had a kid. Yeah. I want to know it's not just what happened this year, it's what's happening in the future.
Just because we're talking about it, I want to talk about my most frustrating tax experience.
Sure.
And I was newly into Robinhood, and they gave, which I currently at the time for a handful of years, I was doing all my taxes myself, either through Credit Karma or TurboTax or whatever it was, through free filing online. But Robinhood gave a promotional to where if just for joining on the app, they would give you a free stock. So I had a free stock of something. I couldn't even tell you what it was. It was like a $3 stock. And then after all of the filing that I did, it was this one $3 stock that they had given me for free that was causing this massive hiccup to where I couldn't file, like on a federal on the federal level. And it was so I was like, I'll pay you $20 just to get rid of this $3 stock that you gave me for free, to where it wasn't this hiccup. That was the biggest, most frustrating. I don't even know how I worked it out. I probably went through like a half a bottle of whiskey, like almost breaking my computer. I was like, this is a $3, maybe not even $3.
See, but
it might have been $2.15 worth of a stock that I had sold because I got it for free, and I was like, oh, I don't care about the stock, and I sold it. And for some odd reason, because it was free, it had to deal with this whole other side. And I'm like, man, this is like $2 or $3.
But for a stock that's $3,
not
Chris,
even worth the 2 hours I've gone through and struggle.
But like, Chris, you're not even going to bat an eye at a $3 stock, are you?
No, I mean, they're all sending me a complete Robinhood like Excel spreadsheet. And there's a different way with my software is how that would be entered. So it wouldn't be necessarily on a per transaction basis. There's a way to do a shortcut. I can put a PDF attachment on my return and then send it in that way. So there's a different, my software probably has a little more, is more user friendly to avoid those kind of headaches.
I don't know, but I mean, like, man, you're making me jump through hoops over like $3 right now. I wanted to file and not have it be a thing, but they wouldn't let me file because I was like, the IRS isn't going to come after $3, right? But they literally wouldn't let me file, and I was already so deep into it that I had to figure it out. It was just such a pain. I don't know. That one in particular, I was like, I would have paid 15 times the amount of what the stock value was just to not have to deal with it in taxes trying to file it online. Anyway, that was my
biggest. I'll see that a lot of times the biggest frustrating client that I'll run into is an engineer, just because that individual is a smart human being, but they typically cause themselves a tax problem because they think they're entering it right. And whenever I get a client, first thing is, what do you do for a living? Oh, I'm a software engineer. I'm a mechanical engineer. And right away, it's kind of like, all right, take a deep breath, because this is going to be one where you not only you have to fix it, but you have to explain they did make the mistake at that point. Or they're going to want, I have no problem you wanting a deep understanding of what we're filing, but that's definitely one of those industries that, because you're a smart human, that doing the taxes is something that you don't want to relinquish control over. Similar client this year, he spent like 15 hours on what it was he was doing. And I'm kind of like, you look at the return, it's married couple, no kids, brought in like $700,000. And it's like, why are you spending 15 hours preparing your return? That's just, but he's just wanting, and he was overcomplicating the whole thing. So we're on a three-way Zoom call with his financial planner, the two of them and myself. And I'm kind of like, you're just making this harder than it needs to be. And unless you're needing 15 hours away from your wife in order to frustrate yourself, I can take this off your hands.
Right.
So it's just the opportunity cost. What's the best use of your time and not make a problem?
No, absolutely. Like, I'm willing to pay the $500. Like, if it comes down to it, like, I'm this year with everything else that's been
it won't be 500, bro.
But I don't even care.
There are people out there that will do it for like 200 or 300, but not 500. That's
like
crazy.
I said, I have notations. Like, I will pay the $500 for somebody to just do it for me, and it's not worth that. Like 20, it's like a whole night. I'll get a whiskey. I'll try to, like, okay, I'm doing my taxes now online. Like, I refuse to do it again.
Yeah,
like,
I'm right there with you, man. I tried it this year. Chris, I mean, we're getting close to the end of the hour, man. And there's one thing that's kind of been been itching at me throughout the podcast. And Jesse and I have been in the service industry for quite a while when it comes to restaurants and stuff like that. And I think, like, when you look throughout the scope of all 50 states, I'm not entirely sure what it is in North Carolina, but when you come out here to Kansas, Missouri, for the longest time, it was $2.13 an hour is what they were paying. What they were paying servers. Now in Kansas, that's still the case. It's $2.13 per hour, but in Missouri, they have raised the minimum wage to $12 an hour, so they're paying servers $6 an hour. Any type of staff that gets a reduction in pay, it's that minimum is $6. But in Kansas, it's still $2.13 an hour. What is your advice to those people, especially probably more so on the Kansas side, whenever they're making, $60,000 to $70,000 a year serving tables or bartending, but they're only making $2.13 per an hour? What's your advice to them?
I mean, I would look at whatever the big picture is. So if you're talking about how they swallow the fact that it's a lower hourly wage, but overall they're compensated well, is that what you're referring to?
Well, more so the tax side, because if, let's say, you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, and again, you're making $60,000 to $70,000. Yeah. You're only making $2.13 per an hour. If you're claiming all of those tips, 100%, which is what you're supposed to do, but the restaurants give you the option not to do that.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? If you claim all those tips, you're going to owe a shit ton of money, because that $2 an hour is not enough to cover your taxes. What is your
Well, they could have a side hustle, and they could then report on a Schedule C, as in Chris. There, you could have a side business doing something, and a loss on that will offset the earned income that they would have from their tips as well as their W-2 earnings. So, and I see it often. I have a client, and she makes real money. I mean, she makes like $500,000 to $600,000 a year. the husband makes like 20 grand as a W-2. And I was like, why? Like, they give more to their church than he makes. So I said, if you had any passion towards any industry, go ahead and be self-employed. You could lose 50 grand and save your house more in taxes than you make in 20 grand. So I would say for that server, even if they had a dog walking business or they had something on the side to claim a loss, that would offset the gain and just have a legitimate thing. You have to turn a profit at some point. I think it's 3 out of 5 years. But they could, revamp what it is they were trying to do in order to make it a legitimate business, but that loss in that situation would offset that gain. But no, if they were reporting it like they should be, they'll get hammered on taxes.
That's crazy.
So side hustle.
Yeah, side hustle.
But even at that point, you have to go through like some hoops and balances, man. I think that's crazy.
But before, because we're probably getting close. I have to ask this question before I forget.
Yeah.
This is in spirit of the third guy that's normally here, who's not here tonight. He is a big proponent in the idea of completely eliminating all income tax, and just having it sales-based tax, which would probably wreck your industry a little bit. But how do you feel about that? To where there is
people still would have problems, so I'm okay with that. I would think the problem is, and Paul and I talked about it. The wealthier you get and the older you get, the less you typically buy things. So that's where, and I had a personal friend client, he's an economist, and that was his argument, is that as Paul gets closer, let's say, to retirement, he may be in his last home, and for the last 20 years of his life, he may not buy another car, he may not buy another house, so he may not have those big ticket items that are purchased in your 30s and 40s and 50s. So you'd be losing out on the taxes that he wouldn't be contributing to.
And the inflation's not there either. He's not also matching the inflation that's happening. Okay.
So I don't think there's a perfect system. The flat tax, those other moving parts, I don't think there's a perfect system, but it could be done much better.
So Absolutely. I just had to bring that up because in spirit of Johnny.
Definitely. That's a good question, man.
Yeah. I had to ask that question.
This is my last question, Chris. What do you say to people out there who who believe in the fact that they don't have to pay taxes? The straw man argument where I was born into this system and I was given a social security number, but I don't want to be a part of that. And I'm going to work my whole life and not pay any taxes. I'm not going to do any of that stuff because it's not legal, blah, blah, blah.
I think something has to resonate with you, whether it's the school system and helping that, roads, the military, something has to make you want to improve those or keep those systems strong. Because regardless of your political affiliation, one of those things has to matter. And I would think that's where, I think your time would be better spent trying to improve those areas and make sure it's, the school system is making good use of their funds, or the military, or whomever it is that you actually care about. Work on how they're spending that money, as opposed to fighting the fact that you should be paying it, because you're gonna lose on not paying.
But I completely agree, because taxes are absolutely essential.
What I'm asking though is, are there loopholes within the tax system where you don't have to pay it? Like when you look at like Donald Trump, for instance, and we kind of went into the rich people. And I know we're at the end of the hour, and you're probably pressed for time, but I think this is very important. You look at like whenever Anderson Cooper was asking Trump about a $900 million loss, and he looked at Hillary in the face and he's like, your donors do the same thing. You're a senator. You put all these laws in place so your donors could, respectively enjoy these tax breaks like I do. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? So
is that a tax write-off donating to a political party?
Well, I don't know about
Hold
that.
On. Can you answer that question, actually? Is that a tax write-off donating to a political party?
I believe so, up to a certain amount. I can get you an answer on it offline.
But you know what I'm saying? Like whenever you go into that realm, like people don't want to pay taxes. Whenever you look at people like Donald Trump and all these major corporations, and I know we briefly got into it on the phone earlier, all these big people not paying.
We can all probably see the moral issue in the idea that donating to a political party can be a tax write-off.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not positive on that, but I can get you an answer. But the systems are in place, and definitely, Paul, I think that the fact that he is exploiting what's been put in place is just, he's got smart people working for him to make use of the system. So I don't have a problem taking advantage of any loopholes that are in place when it comes to that. But it's just absurd that I think more of the public servants getting rich. You can see those numbers when they go into office making this, they come out of office making that. That's where the math doesn't make sense if it's $100,000 a year job, but now you come out a multimillionaire.
No,
So,
dude, I completely agree with that.
I know that we're running like low on time, and we've been bouncing around a lot too. Another question just came up into my head. I heard this. Just so you have somebody hires an artist to paint them a piece, and they pay that artist $15,000 for that piece, and then goes and gets that piece of artwork evaluated, and then somebody will put that piece of artwork at $250,000.
sure.
They then donate that $250,000 piece of artwork to a museum, and then has that as a tax write-off, and then doesn't have to pay taxes that year because they made like, I don't know, 1.5 million or whatever. Does that actually happen?
I don't know. I don't have any clients like that. So, but again, that's a great question.
If you did, you wouldn't talk about it. But but I also heard about just so much things in the art community, and evaluating art and donating it is also tax evasion in some way for reasons of that. I just didn't know if you could touch on that at all.
No, but I'm going to get you an answer on the art thing, and I'm going to get you an answer on the political thing.
Okay.
Rock on, Chris, man. So it's been a fun-packed hour, man. I know we bounced around a lot, but it was,
bunch.
dude.
Yeah, we bounced
We normally don't bounce around that much, man, but like we've been huge. Like within the 4 years that we've done the podcast, we've never done anything when it comes specifically to tax and
Sure.
just focusing in on tax. So I think that's probably majority of why it was that way. But I greatly appreciate you, man. Where can people find you? Do you practice out of state? Are you allowed to do taxes in all 50 states, that type of thing?
Yeah, I'm licensed in all states. So I'm an enrolled agent, which nobody knows what that means, but it's a federally licensed designation to represent clients in all states. So whether someone has a problem with California's franchise tax board or the feds or, Texas and a sales tax issue, they don't have income tax, but all across the board, I can help anyone with preparation or representation.
Is like to where you get as far as your licensing go, like let's say like a Series 7 to be like a financial advisor. Is that in that same realm of difficulty to achieve?
Yeah, so it's the highest federally licensed designation that there is for taxes from that standpoint. So just Google enrolled agent. I didn't have that much problem with the test, but I've known plenty that really were like, oh, it was a complete nightmare. I think because it was more real life stuff. It wasn't like true false. It was more problem solving that it resonated with me. There was an ethics part, a business part, and a personal side. And it just, to me, it didn't seem that difficult. But all in all, yeah, all states licensed. The representation, I think, is fun because you're just dealing with humans. You can find me. It's Guardian Tax Solutions. I'm based out of North Carolina, but licensed all over the place.
I'll put all the links in the description below on each of the videos, Chris.
Awesome.
Hey, before I let you go, man, this one last question I got to ask you. What doppelganger celebrity do you get the most?
Really, I think like Ross from like Friends or
Oh,
something.
shit, I didn't even see that. I didn't see it.
I can see that.
I was more like you look like no offense, but an older Shiloh Bluff. Is it Bluff?
I don't know that.
LaBeouf, yeah. That's
I see
kind of
the
what I
Ross
got.
thing.
I get like Rob Schneider, man. So that's kind of where I'm at. But I like the Ross one, man. That's badass.
We were saying some stuff about Chris Jericho, the wrestler.
yeah,
Because of
yeah.
your name is close.
Yeah.
But I'm like, we can't even bring that up. We weren't even going to bring that up to the guy.
No, we
were like,
weren't.
that's unprofessional.
No,
on the
I hear that.
podcast.
I hear that all the time.
Yeah,
So yeah,
Yeah.
Okay.
with the name side, obviously.
Yeah, the name side. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Chris, greatly appreciate you, man. Thanks for joining Talk Junkies. I hope you have a blessed night and a beautiful rest of your week, my man.
Yeah, likewise. I enjoyed it. And don't hesitate if you ever have any tax question, guys. I appreciate you.
Rock on, man.
Thank
Have
you,
a good
Chris.
night.
Take care.
You too. Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Chris Cherico. He's out in North Carolina with the tax information. So I hope you guys enjoyed the podcast. I hope you liked everything that you saw. If you have any questions or any comments down below, and if we have Chris on again to have some questions for him next time, please put it in the comments below. The best thing you can do for this video is share, like, subscribe, and hit that like button to all our junkies out there.
Stay fly and ring the bell.